Close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let yourself drift gently into a different world. A world where the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, where the wind whispered through narrow village paths, and the flickering light of a candle was the only thing that stood between you and the dark. This is not the world of modern convenience, of screens and soft pillows, of clean water and endless electricity. This is the world of medieval Europe, a place of mystery and hardship, of silent struggle and ancient rhythm. Tonight, we're going to wander through this forgotten landscape, not in haste, not in fear, but in quiet wonder. And as you listen, you'll discover the subtle weight of that ancient life pressing gently around you, until you realize you might not have made it. Not because you are weak, but because the world was once so unforgiving. Still, let that thought relax you, not frighten you, because you're safe here, now, and together we're only imagining. Before we begin, if you enjoy drifting through time like this, where each breath is slower, and every word is like a soft step on an old path, consider gently pressing the like button, subscribing to Sleep Tide Narratives, and sharing this journey with others. And if you've ever dreamed of living in another age, leave a comment below. Tell us which century you'd choose and why. Now, let's begin. Imagine the first thing you wake up to is not the trill of a morning alarm, but the cold, the biting, relentless chill of an unheated stone dwelling. The fire in the hearth died hours ago, and there's frost creeping in at the edges of the timbered walls. Your clothes, coarse and scratchy, were worn yesterday and the day before that, and they'll be worn again today, because they're all you own. You pull them on slowly, fingers stiff with cold, your breath visible in the dim morning light that filters through the slatted wooden window. The straw-stuffed mattress beneath you crunches slightly as you rise. If you're lucky, it wasn't shared with lice or fleas last night. If you're unlucky, well, that was just part of life then. You opened the door. Or perhaps it's just a curtain or a crude wooden latch. Outside, the village is already stirring. Thin columns of smoke rise from scattered homes. A rooster crows. Horses snort softly in a nearby stable, and somewhere a child is already crying. You are not alone, but you are on your own. Your morning meal, likely a piece of stale bread, soaked in weak ale or watered-down milk, if you're fortunate. The concept of breakfast, as we know it, didn't exist. Food was sustenance, not pleasure. Meals were dictated by seasons, harvests, and what little could be preserved. A cold morning could mean dried peas. A warm one might bring last season's pickled cabbage, fresh fruit. A luxury, sugar, a myth, and the idea of dietary variety. Something reserved for the nobility, whose tables you would never see. But let's say you were born not into the destitute, but into the working class, a serf or peasant, bound to the land. You wouldn't choose your profession. It would be inherited, expected, and unchangeable. If your father thatched roofs, so would you. If your mother spun wool, so would your sister. The days were long, not in the poetic sense, but literally. Dawn to dusk, your life was labor. Fields didn't care if your back hurt. Crops didn't wait for sunny moods. You tilled soil with your hands, fed livestock before feeding yourself, and lived by the seasons, the sun, and the mercy of rain. Sanitation was, well, there wasn't any. Not really. Waste ran through open ditches, if it was dealt with at all. Bathing was rare and often frowned upon. Cleanliness, especially among the lower classes, was considered either vanity or a waste. of resources. Lice, fleas, and all sorts of skin conditions were simply part of life. Imagine the constant itch, the slow infections, the odor clinging to every inch of fabric and flesh. But no one noticed, because everyone lived in the same cloud of earth, sweat, and survival. Now think of medicine. If a tooth ached, it was pulled. No anesthetic, no sterilization. A deep cut. You might survive, or it might fester. A fever. Prayer was often your best and only hope. The church dictated not only your soul's salvation, but your body's fate. Physicians, when they existed, believed in balancing humors, strange fluids in the body that governed everything from mood to illness. Bloodletting, purging, burning, these were the cures. Antibiotics were hundreds of years away. Even simple hygiene practices hadn't yet been imagined. Life expectancy hovered around 35, and that number included everyone. The newborns who never saw their first harvest, the mothers who never rose from childbed, and the farmers who fell from ladders and were buried that same afternoon. But it wasn't just the physical that weighed heavy. The spiritual world loomed large and often dark. Superstition was sewn into the very fabric of existence. Every illness could be a curse. Every bad crop might be punishment. Witches were real. Demons lurked in forests. Holy relics could heal or condemn. And salvation that was bought in. Indulgences in penance, in the murmur of Latin prayers you couldn't understand. The church controlled more than worship. It controlled thought, fear, even knowledge itself. Books, rare, reading, unnecessary. Education was for monks and nobles. The average person couldn't sign their own name. Knowledge, if it came at all, came through stories told in whispers, around fires, under stars. Oral history was the heartbeat of culture, but it was also colored by fear, by imagination, by generations of distortion. Truth lived in shadows, and what wasn't known was feared. You didn't own your land. You didn't own your time. You didn't even own your name in the way we think of it. You were John, son of Peter, Agnes, wife of Thomas. Identity was relational, not individual. Your role was fixed, your path already drawn. And if you dared to defy it, if you spoke too loudly, questioned too openly, or believed too differently, the consequences were swift. Stocks, whippings, banishment, even death. There were no courts as we know them, no appeal, no fair trial. Just the word of a lord, or worse, the church. And yet people lived. They sang, they laughed, they loved. Despite the pain and the mud and the fear, life found a way to feel like life. Feasts were celebrated with bread and dance. Children played with carved sticks and chased geese through fields. Bells rang in the evening to call you home. And the stars, even then, looked down with quiet indifference, the same as they do now. As you let this world settle around you, this world where every moment was earned, every breath was fragile, you might begin to understand why survival wasn't guaranteed, why you, born of soft beds and bright lights, might not have made it. But that's okay, because tonight we're not here to survive. We're here to remember, to drift, to breathe in the slow pulse of history. You're safe, you're warm, and the Middle Ages are far away, held gently in the cradle of memory and imagination. So let the thought lull you, not haunt you, and stay with us as we continue this gentle journey through a world that once was. Now breathe deeply and let go. Block to life, labor, and the quiet burden of medieval existence, now that you've gently opened the door to medieval Europe and stepped, barefoot and quiet, into its chill and shadow, let us continue, not with haste, but with patience. Let your breath slow again, your shoulders loosen, and your thoughts settle like dust on an old wooden table. We'll walk together, slowly and softly, through the winding rhythms of daily life, where even the smallest actions carried weight, and where simply enduring was an act of strength. Let's begin again at the start of the day, not from your eyes opening, but from the stillness before. In the darkness of a pre-dawn hour, when the world outside is silent, save for the creaking timbers of your home and the rustling of straw under your limbs, your body already knows what it must do. There is no decision to be made, no choice of outfit, no schedule to scroll. The rhythm of your life is written into your very bones, a rhythm passed down from your father's hands, from your grandmother's spine, from the earth beneath your bare feet. And so you rise. The floor is cold, your limbs stiff from sleep and the unyielding straw. You rub your eyes with fingers that are already roughened from years of work, even if you are only a child. The hearth is dead, and you bend low to stir the ashes, hoping for a whisper of warmth to coax back into flame. If not, you'll rebuild it from the start. Flint, steel, tinder, a ritual of survival, practiced each morning with reverent familiarity. It is quiet, so quiet, the kind of silence only a world without engines, alerts, or hums can offer. Just the faint crackle of sparks and the breath of your own presence. Once the flame is lit and the room begins to remember warmth, the day unfolds. Not with urgency, but with inevitability. You step outside into the pale light of a sky still unsure of morning. The ground is damp, always a little soft, always smelling of moss and clay. In the distance, crows speak their secrets to one another. A neighbor passes by with a nod, hauling a yoke over her shoulders, two pails swinging in solemn rhythm. There are no greetings, no small talk, only the unspoken bond of shared effort. Your work waits for you, as it always does. If you're a man, perhaps it is the field. Rows of furrowed land stretch out like ribs of the earth, waiting to be turned, seeded, blessed. Your tools are few. A wooden plow, an iron hoe, your hands, your back. No machines to ease your load. No weather app to warn you of rain. You read the sky with your eyes. You taste the wind with your tongue. You bend your knees to the soil and ask no questions. If you're a woman, your labor is no lighter. The hearth is your realm, but not in the warm, cozy sense we dream of today. The fire must be tended constantly. Bread must be made by hand, from grain ground at the local mill, if you could afford the tax. Water must be fetched from the well, hauled in heavy buckets across uneven ground. Children must be cleaned, clothed, taught, fed. Animals tended. Wool spun, clothes mended. Even in illness, even in sorrow, the work remains. And if you're a child, you work too. Perhaps you watch the geese, barefoot in the frost, or carry small loads of firewood, or chase rats from the grain. There is no school to escape to, no toys in your hands. Play exists, of course it does, but it is brief, and it is always second to duty. From the moment you can stand, you serve. There is a kind of quiet dignity in this labor. It is not resented, not in the way modern minds might imagine. It simply is. Life is work. Work is life. There is no separation between what you do and who you are. A blacksmith is not a man with a job. He is the blacksmith. The weaver is not someone employed. She is the weaver. Identity is forged. In function, there are no resumes, no promotions, no career changes. Only time and the way it changes your pace, your posture, your capacity to endure. Meals are simple: flatbread, porridge, maybe a thin soup with bits of cabbage or onion. If it's spring, nettles or wild herbs might be added. In winter, salted meats or smoked fish, if the harvest was generous. Spices are rare, salt precious. Eating is quiet. A wooden bowl passed from hand to hand, a shared spoon, no table settings, no napkins, no forks. You eat with fingers, wipe them on your tunic, and move on. And then there are the laws of the land. You are not free, not in the way you might now understand freedom. If you are a serf, you belong to the land, and by extension, to the Lord who owns it. Your home, your tools, your crops, all exist within the shadow of his rule. Taxes are not paid in coins, but in grain, in labor, in loyalty. You may owe days of work to his fields each month, regardless of your own needs. You may owe portions of your harvest, even in times of famine. Justice is swift and cruel. A stolen loaf might cost a hand, a broken rule, a whipping, or worse. And yet there is peace in the order, a kind of comfort in knowing what is expected. You know your place, and so does everyone else. There are no illusions of grandeur, no pretenses. The knight is noble, the peasant is not. The priest speaks for God, the carpenter for the village. It is not fair, but it is clear. Religion is everywhere. The bell tower rings not only for worship, but to mark the hours of the day. Morning prayer, midday angelus, evening mass. You cross yourself without thought, murmur your prayers in Latin you cannot understand, and hope, quietly, always, that your soul is counted among the good. The church governs not just belief, but behavior. It tells you when to fast, when to feast, when to rest, when to confess. Saints are more present than kings. Miracles more trusted than medicine. As night falls, the world dims, not gradually, but completely. There are no lights to delay the dark. Only torches, candles, a hearth, if you're lucky. The village becomes a place of shadows. Doors are bolted. Animals are quiet. Children hush. The dark is not romantic. It is feared. Beyond the firelight, the woods begin, and with them, the unknown. Wolves, bandits, spirits. You stay close to home, close to one another, and you sleep early, not because you're tired, but because the world has gone quiet. And in your dreams, perhaps, you remember that there are other places, other times. You dream of warmth that never fades, of food that never spoils, of freedom to go where you wish. But when the rooster crows again, and the sky begins to blush with morning, all that fades, and you rise. You rise because that is what you do. Let that rhythm now become your breath, in and out. The steady cadence of a life that never rushed, never paused. It simply was. You are safe, you are warm, and we are only visitors to this world, gliding through it on a soft cloud of imagination. Let yourself drift further. The Middle Ages will hold us gently, if we let them. Block 3, the rhythm of time, the shape of society, and the quiet joys of medieval life. Let yourself drift even deeper now, as if you're sinking slowly into a thick woolen blanket, woven with stories and silence. The medieval world, though hard and cold in so many ways, also held a strange kind of warmth, not the warmth of central heating or soft bedding, but of shared fires, of familiar faces, of time measured not by alarms, but by bells, shadows, and seasons. It was a world where life moved slowly, and sometimes that slowness was a kind of peace. Imagine now, not a battlefield or a plague-struck village, but a quiet morning on the edge of spring. The frost has finally begun to retreat, replaced by patches of mud and new grass. The trees, still bare, whisper of buds yet to come. The villagers are stirring, and for the first time in many months, there is a hint of celebration in the air. Today is not for work. It is a feast day. Feast days were scattered across the calendar like small lanterns in a dark tunnel, rare flickering moments of pause and brightness in an otherwise unrelenting life. The church marked them with solemnity, but the people claimed them with joy. Saints' days, holy days, harvest festivals, all became excuses to gather, to laugh, to eat a little better than usual. Not everyone had meat, or cakes, or ale to spare, but even a thicker porridge, a sweeter bread, or a handful of berries saved for the occasion could feel like a royal banquet. Children would run through muddy paths with ribbons tied in their hair. Musicians, often as poor as the peasants they entertained, would pluck tunes from lyres or pipes fashioned from bone and red. Dances were not rehearsed performances, but chaotic, joyous, stomping circles, laughter over precision, spirit over form. There was no stage. The village itself was the theatre, and in those rare moments, the layers of hierarchy loosened. The Lord might not dance, but he might watch from his manor window with a smile. The priest might scold the more raucous songs, but even he might accept a mug of warm cider. People became, for a breath, less divided. The woman who cleaned the chapel and the boy who mucked the stables could sing the same songs and share the same fire. But these moments were rare and fleeting. The structure of society, like the stones of a castle wall, was set and solid. At the top, the king, often distant, almost mythical. His power was vast in theory, but in practice, your life was shaped more directly by your local lord, your bishop, your reeve. These were the figures who controlled justice, protection, taxation. Their word carried weight. Their favor could change a life. Their wrath could ruin it. Below them, the nobles, landowners, knights, barons, whose wealth was measured not in coin, but in control. They had the horses, the armor, the men-at-arms. They held the titles. They hosted the hunts and the tournaments. But even they were bound by the slow, grinding wheel of tradition and duty. Honor, lineage, marriage alliances. Their lives were as structured as any peasant's, just with finer clothes and heavier burdens. And then, the peasants, the beating heart of the medieval world, serfs bound to the land, free men with a little more choice, a little more risk, craftsmen in towns, laborers in fields. Their days were not counted in victories or discoveries, but in sheaves harvested, cloth woven, stones laid. They were the quiet builders of cathedrals. They would never enter, the nameless souls beneath the vaulted ceilings of history. But even among the poor, there were layers. The miller, who controlled the grinding of grain, often held more sway than the farmer. The innkeeper, who heard every secret over cups of ale, wielded a kind of soft power. The midwife, who brought life into the world with bare hands and whispered prayers, was revered and feared in equal measure. Status was not just about wealth, it was about usefulness, about presence, about reputation, which travelled not on parchment but on lips, passed from hearth to hearth like smoke. Education was rare, but wisdom was not. Old women knew the herbs that healed or soothed. Shepherds could read the sky better than any scholar. Hunters tracked not just animals, but time itself, the patterns of nature, the signs of change. This was a world where knowledge was carved into the memory, not written on pages, where stories were the currency of truth, and where the past lived not in museums, but in the minds of the elderly, who told and retold the tales of the village like sacred chants. And yet, for all its hardship and simplicity, the medieval world was not devoid of beauty. It simply looked different than ours. Beauty was in the stained glass windows of the church, windows you might never touch, but through which colored light would spill across the stone floor as you knelt. It was in the carvings on a wooden door, made by a father for his daughters. Wedding in the embroidered edge of a shawl, passed down through 5 generations. In the way the sun hit the thatched roofs at dusk, turning the village golden for just a moment. Time moved differently, too, not in hours, but in bells, not in minutes, but in meals and prayers. You knew the day by the angle of the light, the birdsong, the tasks your hands remembered before your mind awoke. A year was not a number, but a cycle, planting, tending, harvesting, resting. The rhythm was slow, and it never changed. But in that very repetition, there was peace. No decisions to torment the mind. No endless options. Only the next step, and the one after. Children grew like saplings quickly and close to the ground. Few toys, few books, but imagination bloomed where silence lived. A stick could be a sword, a puddle, a sea. A tale whispered by candlelight could shape a dream. They learned by watching, by doing, by being needed. Childhood was short, but it was full. Old age, when reached, was a kind of triumph. To live past 40 was to become a sage. Wrinkles were not feared, but honored. The old were not hidden away, but kept near. Their stories were the threads that held a family together. Their presence a reminder of survival, not just of one person, but of a way of life. As you sit now, wrapped in the safety of the present, this world might seem distant, strange, even harsh. But let that strangeness lull you, not disturb. You, the more you see it, the more you realize that beneath the soot and sorrow, there was something timeless, a kind of stillness, a life without rush. A life that asked you not to conquer, but to endure, not to shine, but to remain. Let the idea of that life calm your breath. Let the weight of its slowness pull you deeper into rest. We'll explore more of it soon, the fears, the faith, the dreams that lived behind those wooden doors. But for now, just drift. You are safe, you are far from toil. And the world of medieval Europe is only a soft whisper in the dark. Block for castles' conflicts, and the quiet fear that never slept. Let yourself rest deeper now, as we drift further into the slow, dim corridors of medieval life. The candle of the past flickers gently, its flames soft and low, casting long shadows across the rough stone of history. We have seen the rhythms of labor and the softness hidden beneath the hardship. But now we move quietly into another side of this world. A side wrapped not in the simplicity of daily toil, but in the ever-present breath of fear. Not loud, not panicked, but quiet, constant, lingering like a cold mist that never truly lifts. Fear in medieval Europe did not come from loud sirens or headlines. It came from silence, from absence, from smoke on the horizon, from hoofbeats. At night, you see, the world then was not peaceful. It was not safe. It was fragmented, like a puzzle of 1,000 small kingdoms, duchies, baronies, and free towns, each ruled by a different hand, each with its own customs, loyalties, rivalries, and ambitions. There was no central peacekeeper, no universal protector. Safety was something you either built, bought, or prayed for. And so, above the thatched roofs and open fields of the village, there rose, often in stark contrast, the castle, a stone fortress, heavy, permanent, cold. It stood not as a symbol of beauty, but of necessity. Castles were not for comfort. They were for defense, for power, for survival. Their thick walls and narrow slit windows were not aesthetic choices, but tactical ones. The drawbridge was not charming, it was life or death. If you were lucky, you lived in a village under the protection of a nearby castle. If not, you lived at the mercy of whoever came through your land next. Raids were common, from rival lords, from foreign invaders, from bands of lawless men with nothing to lose. Borders shifted constantly. Alliances broke overnight. One year, you might owe taxes to a nobleman 3 days' ride away. The next, a different lord, with a different flag and a different set of rules, might claim dominion over the same fields. You had no say, no vote, only obedience. Imagine it. You are in your field, tending to the early shoots of barley. The sky is pale, the air still. Then, far in the distance, the faint shimmer of armor, the sound of horses. You do not cheer, you do not wave, you freeze, because you do not know if they bring protection or pillage. You run to warn the village. The bell is rung, doors are barred, fires are doused, and everyone waits, quietly, breathlessly, hoping to be ignored. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And even if no outside enemy came, fear often lived closer to home. Justice, such as it was, served the powerful. There was no presumption of innocence, no fair trial. The word of a noble could condemn. The suspicion of a neighbor could lead to the stocks, or worse. Punishments were public, humiliating, painful. Executions were not rare. They were entertainment, moral lessons and rituals, all in one. The square would fill with people, not just to watch, but to reaffirm the order of things. This is what happens, the world seemed to whisper. This is how it stays together. And beneath all this, the church. A refuge for some, a threat for others. Its power was spiritual, yes, but also political, legal, financial. Heresy was not an idea, it was a crime. Doubt was dangerous. Books, when they existed, were kept locked. Knowledge was hoarded like treasure. The word of the priest was not merely advice, it was law. And when the church accused, few dared question. Yet still, life continued. The fear was not sharp, not shocking. It was slow, soft, like a weight on the chest. A presence behind you in the dark. A pressure that shaped how you walked, spoke, prayed. It didn't stop you from singing at the harvest, from falling in love, from planting seeds, but it was always there. A reminder that peace was never permanent. That safety was always temporary. That nothing, not even your own name, was fully your own. You might ask, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they rise up? Why didn't they change it? But to ask that is to forget the nature of the world they lived in. There was nowhere to go. The forests were deep, and dangerous. The mountains high and wild. The roads, if they could be called that, were muddy tracks filled with thieves and beasts. Most people lived and died within 20 miles of where they were born. The idea of escape didn't even exist. The idea of rebellion that came later, and even then, rarely with success. Instead, people endured and found moments of peace within the chaos. A warm evening, a wedding, a song, the joy of harvest, the silence after snowfall, the arms of a lover, the eyes of a newborn child. These things, fleeting, simple, became anchors. In a world where nothing was guaranteed, they were the treasures, not stored in chests, but in memory, not guarded by swords, but by silence. And so, as you lie here now, in your own time, with walls that protect, with laws that defend, with choices you can make, you begin to see why you might not have survived in medieval Europe. Not because of one danger, but because of all of them woven together. An environment of quiet unpredictability, of structured fragility, of days earned by the hour. But don't let that frighten you. Let it cradle you. Let the stillness of that world, the weight of its stone and silence, settle over you like a blanket of history. You are only visiting, only drifting. Let go. Block 5: faith, ritual, and the invisible thread of the sacred as we continue to drift through the quiet lanes of medieval Europe. Wrapped in wool and silence, it becomes clear that this world was not only built of stone and soil, but of belief. Beneath the thatched rooftops, between the clatter of hooves and the crackling of hearths, there was a deeper hum, a soft, persistent vibration of faith that bound people to each other, to the earth, and to something beyond both. Religion in this time was not a compartment, not a Sunday affair or a private meditation. It was the very air people breathed, the sky they looked to, the language they used to make sense of joy, suffering, life, and death. Imagine waking not just into a day of work, but into a day that belongs to God. Before you eat, before you speak, before you even stretch your limbs fully, your mind might already be praying. A whispered paternoster, a quick sign of the cross. The presence of the divine was not reserved for temples. It was embedded in your home, in your footsteps, in the smoke rising from the fire. Every hour of your day was framed by sacred time. The bells of the nearby chapel marked not just the passing of daylight, but the rhythm of devotion. Matins at dawn, terce before midday, sext at noon, none in the afternoon, vespers at dusk, and compline at night. Even if you didn't understand the Latin words, the sound itself was familiar, like a lullaby sung by stone walls and weathered hands. The church was the heart of every village, not just a building, but a presence. Its tower watched over the people like a sentinel. Its walls offered not only worship, but shelter. Its altars saw more tears than laughter. Baptisms, marriages, funerals, all of life's thresholds passed through its doors. And yet, you might never sit in a pew as we know it. There were no rows of benches. Most stood through the service. Some knelt, others wept silently near the back. The smell inside was a mixture of beeswax, incense, damp stone, and old wood, a scent that stayed in your cloak long after you left. And if you were one of the rare few who could read, the Bible was not a book in your home. It was a manuscript in a monastery, handwritten by monks over months or years, illuminated with gold leaf and deep blues made from crushed lapis lazuli. Its words were not discussed at the dinner table, but intoned from the pulpit, interpreted by priests, and received not with questioning minds, but with bowed heads. The concept of personal interpretation, of spiritual autonomy, had not yet taken root. The church was not merely a guide, it was the sole path to heaven. But faith wasn't limited to churches or scriptures. It lived in gestures, in rituals, in the simplest daily acts. A mother crossing her child's forehead with ash before he went to the fields. A farmer burying a medallion of a saint at the edge of his crops. A traveler murmuring prayers at a roadside shrine built around the weathered bones of some long-forgotten holy figure. These acts were not superstition, not folly, they were comfort, structure. Hope in a world where control was scarce and suffering close. Miracles were believed, not debated. Pilgrimages were undertaken on foot, across hundreds of miles, not for sightseeing, but for redemption. Relics, a sliver of wood said to be from the true cross, a vial of saintly blood, the toe of a martyr, were treasured, kissed, guarded. They were not mere objects, but bridges between earth and heaven. To touch one was to brush against eternity. And then, of course, there was the fear, not just of sin, but of damnation. The medieval imagination saw the afterlife, not in vague clouds and angels, but in vivid, detailed geography, the flames of hell, the torments of purgatory, the glories of paradise. Paintings, sermons, stained glass, all were filled with these images. A single misstep, an unconfessed sin, an impure thought. These were not just mistakes, but dangers to the soul. And so, people confessed. They fasted. They wore hair shirts under their clothes. They joined processions in sackcloth. Not because they lacked joy, but because they longed for mercy. But, for all its strictness, medieval faith was also full of tenderness. The Virgin Mary was not distant, but close. The mother of all, the one who wept with you, who listened when you had no one else to tell your sorrows to. Saints were chosen like companions, each with a story, a personality, a specialty. Saint Anthony helped you find what was lost. Saint Christopher kept you safe on the road. Saint Francis smiled upon animals. Faith was not just vertical, not just about God on high. It was horizontal, woven through the community, alive in conversation, in shared belief, in communal rituals performed over generations. And then there were the festivals, not just the austere fasts, but the joyful celebrations that merged the sacred with the earthly. Easter and Christmas, of course, but also Candlemas, Ascension Day, the Feast of St. Michael. Entire villages would prepare for days, baking special breads, adorning doorways with flowers or evergreens, crafting banners. The processions were long and solemn, but the feasts afterward were lively, filled with music, dancing, storytelling. In these moments, the sacred and the ordinary touched, and no one questioned the union. Faith also helped explain the unexplainable. A failed harvest, a divine test, a sick child, perhaps a punishment or the result of a curse. Thunderstorms were not meteorological events, but the wrath of heaven, a rainbow, a promise, a solar eclipse, a sign of the end times. And if a traveler came through your village speaking strange words, dressed oddly, or bearing odd marks, he might be a prophet or a demon. The world was enchanted, not metaphorically, but truly. There were angels in the forest. There were devils in the well. There were sacred trees and haunted hills. And each family had its own whispered stories passed down over bread and firelight. It was in this world that people laid their heads down at night, wrapped in homespun cloth, under roofs that creaked. With the wind, they prayed not for dreams, but for safety. They crossed themselves, not from habit, but from hope. They listened for the church bell even in their sleep. And when morning came, the first thought was not coffee or work, but thanks for having woken up at all. And so, you see, to survive in medieval Europe was not merely a matter of enduring hunger or surviving war. It was about carrying a sacred weight, the invisible, constant presence of a divine order that you did not question, but obeyed. And perhaps this is the part most foreign to us now. Not the lack of comfort, but the lack of choice. Not the pain of poverty, but the stillness of certainty. Let that stillness rock you now, like a lullaby of incense and candlelight. Let the prayers of 1,000 forgotten voices wrap around you like mist. You do not need to understand them. You only need to hear the hush beneath them, the silence that comes when faith is not fought, but folded into daily life like a quiet thread in the cloth of time. You are safe now. The church bells are distant. The saints are watching. The fears of that age are behind us. But their dreams, their longing for light, for peace, for mercy, they are not so far. Just breathe. Block 6 from cradle to grave. The gentle passage of life in medieval Europe. Let us now lie still together for a moment, as if beneath the ancient beams of a medieval roof, while the wind brushes the outside world and the soft crackle of a hearth whispers in the silence. Close your eyes and breathe deeply, for we're about to drift slowly through the most sacred current of any human world, the passage of life itself. And in the medieval world, this journey from the first breath to the final prayer was not rushed, not hidden, not avoided. It was witnessed by all, embraced in its fullness, and bound to the rhythm of earth, time, and the divine. Life began not with hospitals or ultrasound machines, but in the small, shadowed space of a home, a one-room cottage, perhaps where the floor was packed earth and the air smelled of smoke and damp linen. A midwife would arrive, called not by telephone, but by a barefoot messenger in the night, her presence as revered as that of a priest. There were no sterile instruments, no monitors, just hands, water, prayer, and the unwavering strength of women who had done this before, dozens of times, under candlelight and pressure. The mother labored in silence or song, her cries muffled by woolen blankets or the recitation of psalms. Nearby, family members waited, not in sterile waiting rooms, but by the fire, fingers twisting rosary beads, hoping that the child would cry and that the mother would live, because childbirth was dangerous. The line between life and death blurred with every contraction. And yet, when the baby arrived, slick with life, eyes closed tight against the light of the world, there was no applause, no announcement, only relief. A washing in warm water, a name whispered, a hurried baptism if there were any doubts about the infant's survival, because to die unbaptized, in the minds of medieval believers, meant to drift forever in limbo. The first breath was precious, the first prayer immediate. And so began a life, tiny, fragile, vulnerable. Infancy was not adorned with bright toys or educational games. It was filled with swaddling cloths, shared milk, and the rhythm of the mother's chores. Cradles were rocked by feet as hands spun wool or kneaded dough. Lullabies were folk prayers, passed down in melody more than meaning. Many babies did not survive their first winters. Sickness came swiftly, and remedies were few. But those who did live became quickly part of the village. There were no daycares, no walls between generations. A child was raised by many hands, siblings, grandparents, neighbors, all teaching through presence rather than planning. As children grew, They did not graduate from one stage to another. There were no birthday parties or printed diplomas. A boy might begin helping in the fields at 7, guiding oxen or scattering seed. A girl might learn to churn butter, gather herbs, or patch clothes by 8. Education, if it existed, was practical. Most could not read, but they could count, estimate, remember. They listened to stories by firelight, learned songs while fetching water, discovered the names of stars while walking sheep at night. They knew the patterns of life not from books, but from living them. Adolescence came not with rebellion, but with responsibility. A girl of 12 might be preparing for marriage. A boy of 14 might already be apprenticed, learning the trade that would carry him through the rest of his life. Emotions were felt deeply, but expressed quietly. Love was often arranged, or born slowly within arranged unions. And yet, love did bloom. Sometimes in glances exchanged during festivals, in notes passed secretly, in whispered words between the grind of work and the glow of dusk. Weddings were not opulent. They were community events, a shared meal, a blessing, a dance. Two hands joined not just in affection, but in survival, in partnership, in the raising of children and the keeping of fire. Married life was ordinary, sacred in its repetition. The home was a place of work more than rest. Couples built together, planting, weaving, nursing, baking. Each season brought new tasks. Winter meant mending and preserving. Spring meant planting and cleaning. Summer was harvest and heat. Autumn, preparation for the cold. And through it all, women gave birth again and again, often with no more than a few weeks between labor and labor. Children died. Parents mourned. But no one stopped. There was always more to do. Grief was folded into bread, into soil, into lullabies sung to the next child. Old age, when it came, was a gift. Few reached it, and those who did carried the weight of years in bent spines and tired limbs. But they were not discarded. Elders were storytellers, memory keepers, sources of wisdom. They sat near the fire while younger hands worked, their presence a comfort, their words a bridge to generations long past. A grandmother's tale of the winter when the river froze solid. A grandfather's warning about the forest path after dusk. These were not just memories, they were guidance. And then, finally, came death. Not behind hospital curtains, not sanitized or distant, but present. A dying person was surrounded by family, by neighbors, by the village priest. Prayers were whispered, candles lit, the body anointed. The deathbed was sacred, not feared. It was where confessions were made, forgiveness given, final breaths honored. Children were not shielded from it. They saw the stillness. They wept. They helped prepare the body, wash it, wrap it, walk it to the churchyard. Death was not hidden. It was expected, and because of that, it was less terrifying. Funerals were simple. A wooden coffin, if possible. A shroud, if not. The body carried by neighbors, laid in consecrated ground, marked perhaps with a stone, perhaps only with memory. There was mourning, of course, wailing, silence, sadness, but also acceptance. Because life and death were not enemies, they were siblings, always side by side. In this world, there was little room for illusion. People knew what they were born into. They knew what they would become. And they found meaning not in novelty, but in repetition, in continuity, in knowing that their life, humble and brief, was part of something much older and wider than themselves. And so, As we lie here now, resting in the echo of that long-forgotten rhythm, we begin to understand something subtle. That survival in medieval Europe was not about fighting death, but living fully within its shadow. That every moment, from a baby's first cry to an elder's final sigh, was touched by the sacred, not in thunderclaps or visions, but in the quiet endurance of everyday love, of ordinary courage, of hands that kept working, even through sorrow. You are safe. You are far from that world, and yet you carry the same questions, the same hopes. Let the simplicity of their lives soothe you. Let the pattern calm you. Let the idea that we are all born, we all love, we all lose, we all leave, carry you gently into rest. Block 7, the medieval city. Stone, smoke, and the hum of human closeness. Not everyone in medieval Europe lived on a farm or in a quiet village tucked between fields and forests. Some lived within walls, high, grey, uneven walls made of stone and wood, patched and rebuilt over generations. These were the cities, not the vast, towering skylines we imagine today, but smaller, denser clusters of humanity, where life pressed in close, and every step echoed with the footfalls of centuries. Tonight, let us wander slowly through one of these cities. Let your breath steady, your mind grow still, and your imagination stretch just enough to feel the cobblestones beneath your feet, the wooden beams overhead, and the hum of life unfolding in close quarters. You enter through a gate, heavy, creaking, iron-braced, guarded not by uniformed officers, but by tired watchmen with pikes and eyes dulled by repetition. The gate is locked at night for safety. Travelers who arrive too late must wait outside, huddled near torches, whispering prayers for protection until dawn allows entry again. Inside, the streets are narrow, so narrow that two carts cannot pass. Side by side, the buildings lean in as if speaking to each other in hushed tones. Their upper stories extend beyond their bases, timber frames groaning under weight and age, creating a sense that the city is folding in on itself, pressing its people into shared breath and shared burden. The ground beneath you is not clean. It is not paved in the way we think of now. It is layered with dirt, straw, ash, and waste. People toss refuse from their windows, scraps of food, dirty water, sometimes worse. A call of warning is supposed to precede the toss, a shouted phrase, almost ritualistic, reminding all below to step aside. But it is not always heeded. The smell is thick. Not vile, exactly, but pungent. A mix of wood smoke, sweat, spices, manure, and mold. You do not wrinkle your nose. It is simply the scent of life, packed tightly. Vendors line the streets, their stalls made of uneven boards and bright cloths faded by weather. Bakers pull flat rounds of bread from clay ovens. Fishmongers slap their wares on wet planks. Butchers display cuts of meat, their aprons stained with the honest work of hunger. The calls of hawkers echo through the alleyways, offers shouted, bargains made, coins clinked. There is no supermarket, no fixed price. Every transaction is a conversation, a negotiation, a tiny battle between need and greed. Artisans work, openly cobblers hammering soles, potters shaping clay, tailors mending hymns, blacksmiths striking red-hot iron with rhythm and resolve. Each trade is a craft, each craft a lineage. Guilds form to protect these crafts, collectives of knowledge and pride. To join a guild is to find a place in the city's intricate web. To be a butcher's apprentice is to rise before dawn, learn the weight of a cleaver, understand the anatomy of beasts, and one day, perhaps, hang your own sign. These signs are often pictorial, few can read, so a boot, a mug, a candle carved in wood above the door tells you what lies inside. There are no skyscrapers, but churches rise high. Their spires are visible from almost any point in the city, reminding all who live within that the divine watches from above. Even here, among the noise and grime, bells ring at intervals, calling the faithful, marking the hours, summoning silence. For prayer, pigeons roost on stone ledges. Children chase each other through the cloisters. A monk passes silently, robes brushing the walls. The city is alive not just with work, but with movement. Carts creak by, drawn by tired oxen. Dogs sniff at the edges of markets. Cats dart through alleyways, guardians against rats. Women carry baskets on their hips. Men haul barrels on their backs. Water is fetched from public fountains, where gossip flows more freely than the stream itself. Everything is shared, not out of generosity, but out of necessity. Space, smells, sounds, even air. At night, the city changes. The market's empty, the fires dim, windows are shuttered. Torches flicker on the walls, shadows stretch, and while the village sleeps with the stars, the city sleeps with one eye open. There are pickpockets in the dark, fights in the taverns, secrets exchanged beneath stairwells. But there are also songs, drunk and heartfelt, lovers whispering behind doors, candles burning in workshops where time slips unnoticed. The city never fully sleeps. It murmurs, it breathes, it waits for morning. Disease spreads quickly here. One cough becomes many. One fever passes through streets like wind. The plague, when it comes, is merciless in cities. Bodies pile, doors are marked. Prayers intensify. Bells toll, not for time, but for death. And yet, people return, rebuild, resume, because the city offers something the village does not. Opportunity, change, possibility, even if narrow, even if risky. To live in the city is to gamble, to hope that you might rise, even just a little. By your hands, by your voice, by your presence. Education lives in cities, too. Not for all, but for some. A boy with a sharp mind might be sent to a scribe. A girl with a beautiful voice might join a convent choir. There are schools attached. 2 churches, where Latin is taught slowly, carefully, with long switches and longer prayers. Books are copied by hand. Inks are precious. Parchment costs more than many can earn in weeks. And yet, the idea of learning floats here, like a perfume, faint, rare, but present. Entertainment weaves through the alleys. Storytellers draw. Small crowds. Actors perform morality plays on crude stages. Musicians play lutes and flutes, their melodies rising above the clatter. Jugglers toss apples in the square. Poets recite verses about saints, battles, and love. These moments, ephemeral and delicate, bring color to stone, laughter to dust. But the city is not gentle. It does not cradle you. It requires your attention, your caution, your strength. It demands that you adapt, that you learn where to walk and when to speak. Its laws are local, its dangers are constant, and yet people stay, because here, amidst the noise and closeness, there is a strange freedom. You are not bound to a lord, you are not tied to a field. You can sell, you can trade, you can disappear into the crowd. You can reinvent yourself. Still, for someone from today, from wide roads and silent nights, the city would be overwhelming. The proximity, the filth, the absence of privacy. The way walls seem to press in, the way your name is always known or always ignored. The lack of refuge, the constant motion. Survival here is not about food or faith alone. It is about finding your rhythm amid the chaos, carving your own stillness inside the storm. And so we walk on, slowly, through another twisting street, past a tanner's yard where skins hang drying, past an apothecary's window lined with jars of powders and herbs, past a tavern from which music leaks like smoke, past a courtyard where a mother scolds her child gently in the soft dialect of her people. All of it, the sound, the light, the scent, wraps around you like a cloak, heavy, rough, but real. You are safe here only because you do not truly walk these streets. You are only imagining, only drifting. And as the city fades behind your closed eyes, replaced again by the quiet darkness of your room, let the memory of it calm you, the density, the humanity, the life stacked upon life, like stones in a wall. Let go now, breathe slowly, and if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the heartbeat of a city that never truly sleeps. Block 8, nature, seasons, and the sacred wildness of the medieval world. Let your breath grow slower now, as we step away from the stones and smoke of the city and return to something older, something quieter, something that doesn't shout, but surrounds. The land, the trees, the wind. In medieval Europe, nature was not a backdrop, it was a presence, a force, a rhythm more ancient than language. For most people of the time, the natural world was not visited or admired. It was lived within, constant, immense, and never fully understood. And so tonight, let us wander into those forgotten woods and fields where life whispered through leaves, and survival depended on listening. Imagine the forest first, not the tidy woods of modern parks, but deep, dark, tangled realms of towering oaks, gnarled roots, and silence so complete it pressed on your skin like water. The forest was both gift and threat. It gave wood for fire, herbs for healing, berries and mushrooms, wild game, all precious. But it also held wolves, wild boar, bandits, and spirits, or so the stories said. There were no maps, no signs, just paths worn into the earth by generations of cautious footsteps. To stray from them was to risk being swallowed, not just by nature, but by legend. Because in the medieval mind, the forest was alive. Not metaphorically. Truly, it breathed, it watched, it remembered. Sacred groves were still whispered about in hushed tones, long after the old pagan rites had faded. Stones with markings, trees with strange growths, pools that never froze. These were places of power, feared and revered. The devil was said to walk there. So were witches, so were saints. Stories passed from fire to fire told of travelers who disappeared, of voices heard from hollows in the trees, of lights that danced where no torch burned. And yet, people entered. They had to, for wood, for food, for shortcuts between villages. But they did so with reverence, heads low, steps careful. Children were warned never to go alone. Even adults muttered prayers as they walked, fingers brushing talismans hidden beneath rough cloaks. You see, the line between the natural and the supernatural was thin. A tree struck by lightning might be cursed. A spring that healed wounds might contain the spirit of a saint. Animals were not only meat or labor. They were omens, companions, and sometimes messengers of God or the devil. A black cat, a white deer, a raven at your window, all meant something. Outside the forest, the fields stretched golden in summer, barren in winter, ever-changing. The land was not owned in the way we imagine now. It was borrowed, worked, honored. A family might till the same patch of soil for generations, but still feel it did not belong to them, but to the earth itself. And the earth was moody, capricious. Too much rain, and the seeds rotted. Too little, and the crops withered. A late frost could ruin a year's labor. A swarm of locusts, a blight, a strange cloud in the sky, all could change a season, and with it, a life. And so the seasons were not aesthetic markers. They were survival itself. Spring meant hope, ploughing, sowing, lambing. Every sprout was a small miracle. Summer brought hard labor, long days in the fields, sunburnt skin, sweat and dust. Autumn was frantic. The harvest must be brought in before the weather turned. And winter was a test of preparation, of endurance, of spirit. Food stores dwindled, roads turned to mud, illness crept into lungs and joints. But there was also a stillness in winter, fireside songs, quiet repairs, stories that could only be told when hands were at rest, and snow pressed gently against the door. Nature governed all time, not clocks, not calendars. The sun told you when to rise, the birds told you when to plant, the frost told you when to gather. Even the moon played her part, her phases guiding planting rituals, healing practices, and the timing of festivals. Night did not come by the hour, it fell, like a curtain, sudden and absolute, and the world changed shape when the stars emerged. Without artificial light, the night was a deep, velvety thing. Some feared it, others prayed in it. Still others walked quietly beneath it, trusting the moon to guide their steps. And above all, nature was sacred. The church taught the gods. Creation was to be respected, even feared. Psalms spoke of the mountains praising the Lord, of rivers clapping their hands. Animals filled the pages of bestiaries, not just as biology, but as morality. The ant, a lesson in industriousness. The lion in courage, the owl in watchfulness. Every creature, every plant, held meaning, and in remote villages, older beliefs still lingered, not in defiance of the church, but folded quietly into daily life. A charm hung over a doorway, a branch of rowan against lightning, a whispered chant while milking a cow. These were not heresies, they were habits, ancient instincts, trying to make sense of a world that could not be controlled. There were festivals tied to the land, May Day, with its flowers and dancing, Lammas marking the first wheat harvest, in bulk when the EUs began to lamb. Even Christmas and Easter, though Christian at heart, carried echoes of older seasonal rhythms. The turning of the year was not marked with fireworks or resolutions, but with fire in the hearth, bread in the oven, prayers to keep the wolves away. And when illness came, many turned to nature first. A poultice of moss, a tea of elderflower, smoke from juniper branches. Healers knew which roots to dig, which leaves to crush. They learned from mothers, from grandmothers, from the forest itself. And while the church offered holy water and relics, the village healer offered fox, glove, garlic, yarrow, not always effective, sometimes dangerous, but in a world without modern medicine, they were what people had, and what people trusted. Even dreams were shaped by the land. A river in a dream might mean a journey. A wolf, a threat. A tree heavy with fruit, a blessing. People slept under thatched roofs, but dreamed under stars. Their imagination as grounded in soil as their feet. And when they died, they were buried in the earth they had walked, wrapped in cloth, marked with stone, returned to the soil as quietly as they had come. To live in medieval Europe was to live close to nature, not by choice, but by necessity. And for someone from today's world, where climate is controlled, food is packaged, and forests are distant retreats, that closeness would be overwhelming. There was no escape from mud, from wind, from cold. No barrier between you and the rain. You were soaked, sunburnt, bitten, scratched, and you accepted it, because to curse the earth was to curse your own body. You were part of it, and yet, in that closeness, there was something beautiful, something whole, a sense of place, of belonging, of moving through life with the same patience as a seed, the same persistence as a root, a humility that came not from doctrine, but from weather, a reverence born of exposure. So now, as you lie warm and clean in your bed, with walls that keep out the wind and windows that keep out the cold, imagine the stillness of a medieval field at dawn, the mist rising over the grass, the sound of a distant bell, the crow of a rooster, the sky slowly brightening like parchment touched by fire, and let that image wrap around you like a woolen cloak. Let it settle your breath. Let it remind you that once, not so long ago, to survive meant to listen to the trees, to the sky, to the quiet voice of the land itself. And here, in this stillness, you are safe, far from the forest's edge, far from the turning of the plough, but you carry the memory now of a time when nature was not outside of you, but within you. And that memory, like the earth, asks nothing, it only rests. Block 9 dreams, myths, and the quiet mind of the medieval soul, now that we've wandered through villages and cities, through forests and fields. Let us pause somewhere even quieter, somewhere deeper, beyond the reach of roads or rituals. Tonight, we step gently into the hidden places, not geographic, but human, the places inside, the thoughts, dreams, fears, and hopes that lived quietly within the hearts of medieval people. Because to truly understand why you might not have survived in that time, you must not only feel its hunger or see its struggle, you must learn how they thought, how they imagined, how they saw the world through eyes shaped not by science or freedom, but by mystery, repetition, and the weight of the eternal. To live in medieval Europe was to believe that your life had been written before you were born. The stars, the saints, the soil, they all played their part. Your name, your work, your role in the village, none of it was random. It was fate, destiny, the divine will, and so acceptance was a virtue, not submission, not apathy, but a kind of quiet alignment with something larger than yourself. A surrender not to defeat, but to design. If the harvest failed, it was God's lesson. If your child fell ill, it was a test. If your days were long and lonely, they were part of a story you couldn't yet see the end of. And into that surrender, the medieval soul poured its imagination. Dreams were not dismissed or forgotten. They were messages, signs, a voice from beyond. A dream of fire might mean danger. A dream of a river, transition. Of flying, spiritual ascent. People recounted their dreams in the morning like others recited prayers. They asked elders to interpret them. They believed, truly, that the soul wandered at night, sometimes into heaven, sometimes into peril. Nightmares weren't just the echoes of stress. They were warnings, or temptations, or battles fought while the body slept. Visions were taken seriously. A child who spoke strange words might be a prophet. A woman who saw lights in the trees might be marked by the divine. Saints were said to appear in dreams, offering comfort or command. Demons too. Sleep was not merely rest. It was an opening, a crack through which the sacred or the cursed might slip. And so people prayed before sleep, not just for rest, but for protection. And waking life, too, was colored by myth. The medieval world was not flat and cold. It was layered, heaven above, hell below. Earth in the middle, trembling, fragile, watched. Every event had meaning. Every animal, symbol. A crow on the roof. Someone will die. A sudden storm. A saint is angry. A baby born with a mark, destined for greatness or ruin. There were stories for everything. Tales passed from lips to ears in marketplaces, around hearths, in quiet corners of churches. Stories of saints who bled light, of devils who tricked scholars, of knights who slept beneath hills, waiting for the world's end to rise again. Time itself was different, not linear, but circular. The seasons repeated. The holy calendar returned. Year after year, life was a wheel, not a line. There was no rush forward, no demand for change, only the rhythm. Plant, reap, fast, feast, birth, growth, work, death. And even death was not an end, but a passage into purgatory, perhaps, or paradise, or some unknown resting place. What mattered was not novelty, but harmony. To live well was not to do something new, but to do what had been done rightly. To follow the old paths with clean hands and a faithful heart. And still, within all this structure, people hoped. Hoped for healing, hoped for good weather, hoped for love. They whispered prayers into the darkness. They left coins at the feet of forgotten statues. They tied ribbons to trees. Not because they were naive, but because they believed the world was listening, that somewhere someone cared. Superstition was not foolishness. It was logic in a world without explanation. If someone's cow sickened after a stranger's visit, perhaps it was a curse. If your bread failed to rise 3 days in a row, perhaps someone had given you the evil eye. These ideas weren't isolated. They were shared, reinforced, believed by entire communities. And to question them was not just to doubt a belief, it was to separate yourself from your people, from your place. But there was joy, too, in the mind of the medieval soul. Not loud joy, not the kind that shouts from rooftops, but quiet joy. The joy of routine, of knowing your place, of watching the stars follow their patterns and knowing the moon would rise. The joy of a good loaf, a clear sky, a kind word, of music played on a lute in the square, of a saint's day marked with candles and song, of surviving another winter, another childbirth, another illness. Joy was found in small things, because small things were all most people had. And perhaps that is what would surprise you most, if you could stand among them. Not their poverty, not their pain, but their peace. A kind of stillness in the face of what we now fear. The absence of choice, while limiting, also freed them from the anxiety of infinite paths. There were fewer decisions to torment the soul, fewer comparisons, less pressure to be unique or brilliant or remembered. To be faithful, to be kind, to work well, that was enough. And so the medieval person prayed, not just in church, but in silence, while milking goats, while walking to market, while nursing a wound, a whispered line, a murmured psalm, a question offered to the wind. They carried their faith like a stone, in the pocket, weighty, grounding, always present. Even their fears had form. The devil was real, and he had a face. Fire, horns, claws. Hell was hot, and high above, angels watched with swords and songs. Morality plays brought these fears to life, acted out in village squares. The sinner, the tempter, the redemption. These stories weren't fiction, they were instruction, a reminder of what waited on the other side of every choice. You might think such a life would be stifling, but to them it was order. It made sense of chaos, gave names to the unknown, offered comfort even in hardship, and in that there was great strength. So now, as you lie still and listen, imagine that quiet strength. A world without explanation, but not without meaning. A life without freedom, but not without beauty. A soul that never questioned whether it mattered, because it always did. Let that peace wash over you now. Let their dreams, their stories, their gentle certainties hold you. You are not bound by their fears, but you can rest in their simplicity. The medieval mind lived in darkness, yes, but it also lived in song. And that song, if you're quiet, still echoes now, softly, like a lullaby sung in a language you don't need to understand. Just feel, just rest. Block 10, the final rest, leaving the past and returning to silence. And now we come to the end of this quiet journey. A journey not of miles, but of centuries. One that asked not for footsteps, but for stillness. You have walked through crooked alleys and open fields, touched stone and bark and cloth, tasted the dust of old roads, and felt the hush of candlelit chapels. You have listened to bells, to whispers, to wind. And now, as we drift slowly out of the world of medieval Europe, there is nothing more to do but breathe, and let it all settle around you like soft ash. Because to imagine that world was to visit a place where survival was not guaranteed, where hardship was expected, and where beauty came not from brilliance, but from endurance. A place where people lived close to the ground, to one another, and to the unknown. A place where light was precious, both literal and spiritual, where stories were remembered, not recorded, where the soul moved slowly, shaped by repetition and ritual, and where time passed like a wheel, not a river. And maybe, now that you've seen it, not through the eyes of textbooks or paintings, but through the soft glow of empathy, you understand why survival would have been difficult for you, for any of us. Not because we are weak, but because the world we live in has changed so much, so completely, that even the smallest aspects of medieval life would ask us to forget what we know, to unlearn what comforts us, and to return to a rhythm we no longer hear. Would you have survived the cold of those winters, with no central heat, no thick insulation, no hum of electricity? Would you have endured the hunger that came not from dieting, but from harvests that failed and stores that emptied before spring returned? Could you have accepted a life where your name carried only your father's echo, where your work was your fate, and where choice was a luxury reserved for lords and bishops? Would you have borne the silence, not peaceful, but unbroken by music, screens, or voices from faraway places? Would you have trusted in things you could not read, in words you could not question, in a God whose will was spoken through others, but rarely explained? Could you have given birth at home, buried children without answers, aged without comfort, and died without ceremony? And yet, people did. Millions did. for centuries, not just surviving, but living, laughing, dancing, singing. Their joy was not lesser because their suffering was greater. Their hope was not dimmed by their darkness. If anything, it burned brighter. They built cathedrals. They carved statues. They invented languages. They discovered stars. They endured, and that, in itself, was a kind of brilliance. But now, you can let it go. You do not have to till those fields. You do not have to walk those roads. You do not have to carry those burdens, because your journey was only in your mind, and now that it ends, you return, not to a castle, or a village, or a monastery, but to your bed, to warmth, to softness, to the gentle hum of the present, and perhaps something from that world has stayed with you. A feeling, a rhythm, a kind of reverence for the ordinary, the sound of wood creaking, the glow of firelight, the quiet grace of a simple life. These things remain, even now, even here. You carry them, so rest now. There is no more to learn tonight, no more images to hold, no more stories to follow, only the sound of your own breath, steady and slow, the rise and fall of your chest, like waves on a forgotten shore, the weight of your body sinking gently into sleep. Before you go, if this journey brought you peace, if it helped you drift a little deeper into stillness, we gently invite you to leave something behind. A trace of your presence, a soft imprint. You can like this video, or leave a comment sharing. Which part of the medieval world lingered in your mind? Was it the forest, the chapel, the fields, the silence? And if you wish to return to other places like this, other times, other stories, other quiet paths, we welcome you to subscribe to Sleep Tide Narratives. This is a place of slow time, of soft words, of rest. You are always welcome here. Now, close your eyes, if you haven't already. Let the weight of the world fall from your shoulders, and sleep as they once did. Under wooden beams, under distant stars, wrapped in silence, and held by time. Good night.